Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Progress Texas Advocacy and Development Coordinator, Tatum Owens. Here at Progress Texas, we amplify progressive values, leaders, and actions. Through our no paywall podcast and digital media, we reach millions of Texans monthly, and that's made possible by folks like you who invest in independent, progressive media by Texans for Texans. Our thanks to Bonnie Walton, Jennifer Barnes, and Joanna Hood for their monthly support. We can't do it without y'all, so thank you. On April 29th, on a party line vote, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 on Louisiana v. Callais to strip one of the most consequential protections against discrimination in our elections, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The ruling enables years of racial inequality to come, further eroding fair representation and the equal rights of Black and Brown voters in the South. Without federal intervention from a new Congress, far-reaching harm beyond the next census is assured. Here to talk more about the devastating decision, today we're joined by two guests that work with civil rights legal nonprofit groups. First up is an attorney who worked on the Louisiana v. Callais case, NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Inc., LDF attorney Victoria Wenger. Tori is dedicated towards voting rights cases, including multiple redistricting cases under Section 2 of the VRA, and coordinates a team of LDF staff engaging in year-round voter education efforts and proactive election administration advocacy work in Louisiana. Thank you for being here, Tori.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Also joining us today is Texas Civil Rights Project Voting Rights Outreach Coordinator, Sylvan. Laderica is from Louisiana and is a licensed political social worker in the state of Texas, seeing the direct impacts of policy on communities. While in her master's program at the University of Houston, she interned at the 88th legislative session with the Legislative Study Group, where she analyzed policies for the Elections, Human Services, and Licensing and Administrative Procedures committees. Appreciate both of you being here today for this crucial breakdown of how the SCOTUS decision impacts Texas voters of color and beyond. Everyone's maps will be gerrymandered and kept that way without protections in place. No one is exempt. Thank you both for being here. To start us off, Tori, would you begin and tell us about the broad strokes of the case and what's just changed, overturning decades of protections to ensure every voter has fair representation and equal voting rights?
Certainly. So while I represent Black voters in the state of Louisiana and other organizations that work to mobilize Black communities and ensure that they have fair access to the ballot and representation at every level of our government, this case has far more sweeping implications for voters nationwide and anyone who cares about the promise of a fair and representative democracy or the future of the United States multiracial democracy. So what the case has essentially done is manipulated a record that was supposed to be about the Louisiana congressional map and a map that was enacted after years of Section 2 litigation by the legislature itself in a way that was balancing partisan objectives and also a mandate to comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And finally, after decades, give Black voters an opportunity to elect their candidates of choice in 2 out of the 6 congressional districts. Louisiana has the second largest Black population by percentage in the nation. 1/3 of the population is Black. And for years, those voters were relegated to only being able to ever elect their candidates of choice to 1 seat in Congress. And that has real implications for their representation, for their lives, for the dollars in their pocket, and the policies that will affect generations to come. What the Supreme Court did here, though, is they stuck a dagger in the heart of the Voting Rights Act, at least the remnants of it that continued to exist post Shelby County v. Holder in 2013, post Brnovich v. DNC in 2021. They essentially made it so that Section 2, the remaining anti-discrimination protection in the Voting Rights Act after the proactive protections of Section 5 were gutted in 2013, and stripped away how that type of anti-discrimination opportunity could apply to redistricting. In the Brnovich case, we had seen how the Supreme Court had made it much, much more challenging for litigants, for Black voters, to prove that policies had a racist impact and discriminatory results, if not also clear discriminatory intent. But in the years since, and as recently as the Milligan decision just a couple years ago that LDF also argued on behalf of Black folks in Alabama, the Supreme Court had not done that same damage to how Section 2 could apply in redistricting. And the very robust framework that for decades had dictated how people could bring claims and how courts could analyze them, the robustness of the record to prove that polarized voting along racial lines still exists, that discrimination in the voting process pervades modern day in the South, especially, not just relics of the past, though that is important to understanding the narrative and the moment that we're living in now. Despite the robustness of the record, despite the urgency of creating fair districts to ensure that Black voters can really feel and know that their votes will count fairly, the Supreme Court cast so much of that aside and now has created perhaps insurmountable barriers for voters to be able to ever prove their claims. And the court very disingenuously acted like they weren't wholesale gutting Section 2's application to the redistricting process and letting somehow the heartbeat of this crown jewel piece of legislation from the civil rights movement live on. They absolutely have again stuck a dagger in the heart of the Voting Rights Act and what remained for the promise of fair representation for Black voters and inheriting the legacies of the foot soldiers that marched for that guarantee. So the implications are sweeping. The path forward for Section 2 is all but gone, but the work continues, no doubt, in Louisiana for our clients, for our case, for ensuring that there's a fair map in 2026 and that elections that are happening as we speak can continue. But the work just got a lot harder.
Just an hour before we started recording, news came down that the Louisiana House is going to be postponing their primaries with this decision, right?
Yep. Just today, the governor issued an executive order that suspends the congressional elections in Louisiana, despite the fact that voters overseas, voters above the age of 65, other people that qualify for absentee ballots, many have already returned those ballots. And early voting starts on Saturday with ballots that are ready for that process. And elections will occur on May 16th. So the elections are very much already underway. People have already cast ballots and operated off the assumption that their votes would count. But the governor, the state of Louisiana, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and others are already trying to do harm to that in keeping with how they have treated Black voters during this entire process. And we have no doubt that the legislature, when they reconvene next week, will aim to create further chaos and potentially push unfair maps once again. Indeed, they've already been filed. So we have no doubt that they will do anything that they can to disenfranchise Black people once again.
Yeah, just reprehensible, and what a tragedy to overturn decades of sacrifices made towards civil rights, making it that much harder to prove racial discrimination, which was already difficult, taking away the crumbs. Moving to a question for LaDerica on Texas redistricting and how that factors in. Of course, Texas is also at the forefront of the fight for free and fair elections. The racial redistricting war started with us because our power in numbers is imperative to progress or regression, either way. Just days ago, the Roberts Court cemented Texas's gerrymandered maps, with other states following suit. Just yesterday, after the SCOTUS decision, Florida passed new redrawn maps an hour after the decision passed. LaDerica, would you bring it home to Texas and tell us how this case will impact Texans of color, especially considering this context?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, right? Because I am honored to have so many different ties to this story. My family still actually currently lives in the district that Representative Cleo Fields is over back in Louisiana. So I have personal ties there. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge. I currently do work here with Texas elections, right? Then I'm also a Black woman. And so it's been really hard kind of navigating those waters. I think the biggest thing is like the voter whiplash that we're kind of seeing here with Texas voters of color. They seem to be really confused. I think we've had to do a really great deal of making sure that we're partnering with folks who are doing these on the ground mobilization efforts with voter registration, and making sure that we're educating folks on what districts they're actually involved in, who they're voting for, what they're voting for, right? Because so many things have changed. And so there's a lot of voter whiplash going around. There's a lot of confusion. Add that on top of the voter apathy that we've been seeing within minority communities, especially. I think it's going to be really important that we just continue to educate and mobilize folks for these November elections. And then also we have these primary runoffs coming up on May 26th. So I think it's going to be really important that we just continue to educate and mobilize folks and kind of use this as a fuel. Though very frustrating, though very discouraging, I think the fight does continue. And so we just have to continue to educate folks in our community.
Thank you for that. And bringing it back to the courts, Tori, could you share about what this does for the landscape of voting rights overall? What precedents does this set? And especially, how do we try to remedy this situation legally or elsewhere?
Certainly. So I think we're going to need to push on every lever that we have, and we cannot clearly rely on the courts to be the ambassadors of justice or a fair process when it comes to voting rights. We saw that yesterday. But we also know that we've never relied on them alone. As Laderico was mentioning, this is also a moment for mobilization, for voter education, to let folks better understand what is happening and making sure that they are still exercising their right to vote. Because as much as the court has allowed votes to now be diluted, to have their strength weakened, people are still, even after Callais, entitled to vote just as much as they were tomorrow. And the way to push back against that dilution is to show up with greater numbers than ever, or greater numbers than any of the experts who are analyzing turnout or understanding what it meant for the strength of Black voters, or for partisan objectives, or any of the other pernicious things that the court is now letting legislatures inject into the process and supersede the values of fair representation and racial justice. The way to push back against that is to show up and to claim that power, to insist that this nation is still a democracy by and for and of the people, and to center the people's voice over any other branch of government. You can have the executive, the legislature, the courts, and we will push the levers in each one of those. But the people is who we're on the side of. The people is who we look to. We could not have filed the litigation to achieve a fair map in Louisiana without Black voters who put their name on this litigation, who have fought through now multiple filings in several different courts against a diverse array of judges from different backgrounds, from different political nominating parties, and convince them all that the precedent of the land of Section 2 for decades on end should have applied and entitled them to a fair map. It took going to the Supreme Court under absurd posture and essentially a hope and a dream that conservative justices would do harm to precedent and disregard judicial boundaries and separation of powers, for the plaintiffs here to have gotten their way on this round. But this is a much longer march and fight. We represent voters who, Dr. Robinson, our leading litigant, was 28 years old when the Voting Rights Act passed. Our youngest individual plaintiff, Devontae Lewis, or individual client in this matter and the other related cases, wouldn't be born for another 28 years after the Voting Rights Act was passed. So we know that this is a moment where the precedent is not in our favor anymore as of yesterday. But our work and our values here outweigh any of that pessimism and are a guiding light for us to carry on, not just for the next 28 years or 6 decades or however long it will take for us to realize the promise of a multiracial democracy despite any setback like this.
Thank you, Tori, for that. That reminds me of some remarks from Progress Texas Institute board chair and LDF staff attorney Louis Bedford IV, not in his capacity with the LDF, of course. He asked Progress Texas recently, what do we do in the face of this reality regarding the decision? He said, we can remember that the court has never been the final word of justice in America. When slavery was law, there was the Underground Railroad. When Jim Crow reigned, there was the Civil Rights Movement. When police raided Stonewall, the LGBTQ plus community resisted. And now the Voting Rights Act has been effectively gutted. Citizens must keep organizing, voting, and working to preserve our country's multiracial democracy. Time and time again, the people have protected humanity when institutions refused. And we must meet this current moment with the same vigor and tenacity as those who came before. So I just feel like this is an extremely devastating moment. You can't understate that enough. And at the same time, this is part of a legacy of other people and civil rights leaders and everyday Americans, Texans, Louisianians. Is that how you say it? Okay. Thank you for that perspective, Tori. And I guess both of our guests be able to speak to that today. Laderica, you've already spoken to the fact that you are a Black woman from Louisiana living in Texas, so Supreme Court is coming after you. Would you speak to the reverberations of this case on advocacy work going forward and impacts on voters of color and community members?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our partners at Black Voters Matter recently kind of highlighted like the numbers, actually pre this Callais decision, right, of what it would look like if we kind of lose congressional seats representing folks of color, right? So they highlighted that it'll be about 25 to 30% of the Congressional Black Caucus that could be lost, as well as about 11% of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus as a result of this ruling, right? So now that we actually have this ruling, that makes that more of a possibility. And so obviously, like, the Black community is not new to, you know, the finish line constantly being moved for us, right? And so we'll just find different ways to continue the fight. I think it's going to be really important to emphasize, especially on the ground. One thing that I always try to talk about as I'm tabling and I'm talking with folks in the community is your voice does matter. And if it didn't, there wouldn't be so many tactics used to try to stifle that voice, right? And so kind of getting them to realize that there are always so many things that are changing. There are always so many things that are being thrown at us and combated to kind of stifle our voice. And so that means that it matters, right? And so I think that's been one thing that I've definitely been trying to highlight. I think, you know, it's pretty crazy the times that we're living in. And so really just trying to level with folks about what issues are important to them and kind of highlighting like, hey, this is how the government impacts these issues that are important to you. And so it's important for you to come out and vote and make sure that your voice is heard despite the ways that they're trying to stifle it. And I think it's important. It's not just important for us to make sure that we're highlighting issues that matter to us as organizations, but leveling with folks that are actually living these day-to-day issues and what's bothering you on the day-to-day and how your local, state, and federal government actually impacts your day-to-day life. And so those are things that I've been trying to highlight. And again, we'll continue to be resilient. We'll continue to continue the fight. And, you know, I think there were some Black Louisiana voters that even said, like, we deserve our vote to matter as much as any other. And so that's very true. And I continue to keep that motivating me as I continue to just try to mobilize folks on the ground.
Thank you for that. And that actually brings us to one of our last questions for y'all today. We'll also talk about some calls to action, some movement that you can take from this session today for our listeners. But for now, would the two of you just share some words of wisdom as individuals who work in both difficult states and contexts to move forward progress? How do you keep going? What should other people do to do the same? And Tori, would you start us off?
I think the energy to continue is entirely rooted in community. I work for a national organization, but one of the best compliments I get is when folks confuse me for a Louisianian because so many people I care about are there and I spend so much time there in a fight with them. And so when I think of Louisiana, I'm not thinking of the Louisiana v. Callais that was turning against its citizens, its Black people. I'm thinking of folks like Ashley Shelton, who leads the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, of Devontae Lewis, who again is inspiring a generation of young Black elected officials to be audacious enough to run for office and to lead. I'm thinking of people like Dr. Press Robinson, who was an elected official himself, who has been our champion in this litigation, and who, you know, through all of this is resilient, is focused, eyes on the prize, understanding that, you know, his generation fought to hand mine a Voting Rights Act and a true multiracial democracy. And now the baton is in our hands to hand it back and let him, you know, relish it and enjoy it for a bit. So maybe he could retire, take a break from this very arduous work and the ways in which we've kept him busy in this case and all its permutations for years and years and years. But when I focus on the community, when I focus on the individuals who are in this fight all of us together, it becomes deeply personal. And when politics become personal, you don't have a choice but to keep carrying on. But you also get to relish the reward of people, of community, of care. And I guess I'll leave it with what Ashley always says about Louisiana. And when people ask her, like, why would you stay in a place that keeps disrespecting you like this? She says, everything I love, everyone I love is in Louisiana. And that's perhaps why I get such compliment and fulfillment when I get mistaken as being a Louisianian, because it's a testament to how we show up in love and care for each other in these hard times. And how could we ever frame this work as losing when we get to reap that reward of each other and the endurance and knowing we together are on the right side of history.
Thank you for painting that picture of resilience and what it takes and who's part of it. Laderica, would you share as well about words of wisdom, some hope there?
Yeah, absolutely. Tori, I'll go as a Louisianan. I'll say that we officially will adopt you, for sure. Thank you, for fighting for us. Louisiana will always have my heart, for sure. I think one thing that I will always tell people, is know your why. Your why is the one thing that will always keep you pushing no matter what. Why are you in this work? Why do you continue to get up and fight every day, knowing that at any point, your rights could continue to be stripped from you, right? For me, my why, I have a heart for people. Like, I have a heart for advocating for people. I have a heart for, being there to be the voice for folks who cannot be there for themselves. I have always wanted to uplift Black voices specifically, just being a seat at the table, right? Being a political social worker, I'm able to kind of see the person as well as the policy. So I can see both. I'm able to see the impact on that person and then the actual policy itself. And so I think it's really cool. But I'm able to kind of keep going because of my why. My why is I love Louisiana. I love its people. I want to continue to advocate for folks that look like me. And this is just one way to do that. Voting rights has become a passion of mine over the past 5 years or so. Definitely working at the legislature opened up my eyes to a lot of things here in Texas, and honestly made me just want to continue to advocate. And so if I could say anything, that's what I'd say. Like, know your why and keep reminding yourself of your why to continue to push you, so that you can have the endurance to keep running the race.
Okay, that leads me to our last question. And Laderica, I'll actually pass it back to you. So let's talk about the why. What about the how? How do people get involved with each of your organizations? Laderica, would you talk about TCRP just for a sec and how people can get involved?
Absolutely. So we've recently started building more of our volunteer base out. While TCRP doesn't do a lot of voter registration efforts, we do have opportunities to get involved with us. So if you go on our website, we actually do have a volunteer page. And we're actually in the process of ramping up kind of a smaller program ahead of the primary runoff. So if folks want to get involved and be poll monitors, you're able to do that. We have our election protection hotline, which is 1-866-OUR-VOTE. So folks are able to call in during early voting, during election day, and basically call in any issues that they may see. If there are long lines, if someone's not following the right protocol at that location, folks are able to call in there. But we definitely are looking for poll monitor volunteers. We're trying to do that on the first and last day of early voting and election day. So those 3 days specifically. And we'll be doing that program in Harris, Hidalgo, Williamson, Tarrant, and Dallas County. And so definitely feel free to plug in with us there. The other thing is, if you're not interested in that, please just get out to vote. If you have any questions, there are always really great resources out there. One that we always like to uplift that is nonpartisan is the League of Women Voters. They constantly have different guides and resources that you all can use to kind of figure out where you lie on the totem pole with certain issues. So definitely use those resources if you have any questions about what's on the ballot or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you so much for painting that picture. And TCRP is just such a leader when we're talking about protecting voting rights in our state. Crucial, as we have stated today. Tori, would you talk about also another fantastic partner, national level, doing great work here in Texas, including trying to put forward a Texas VRA? Would you talk about state VRAs overall and what the LDF is doing nationally?
Certainly. So state VRAs are, again, one of the plethora of tactics that we have to engage in. and were engaging in before Callais, and can certainly continue the momentum on nationwide moving forward. LDF works in partnership with groups across the nation, and we have very deep roots and continued partnership with groups in the Deep South, and specifically contiguously from South Carolina through Texas. Along the South, our Black Voters on the Rise initiative, which is part of my team, will be working in partnership on election protection. We'll be supporting our policy team in advancing voting rights acts at the state level and other proactive voting policies to be able to move justice. One of the elements of all this work that gets lost in all of the assaults on fairness is that in the midst of fighting for fair maps for the last 5 years, Power Coalition, LDF, and other groups in Louisiana have also advanced roughly a dozen pro-democracy, pro-voting rights policies at the state level because we were audacious enough to draft them and try. I think there's a lot of disillusionment within progressive spaces about ever being able to move policy in the South, especially. And I think the testament of the fact that state voting rights acts have now been filed across the South, have moved out of committee in some legislatures, like in Alabama, or have been enacted in states like Virginia, is a testament to, again, that audacity of just trying to move progress and, advance racial justice against the odds. So whether it's SVRAs, whether it's other policies, whether it's just advocating around having a poll site closer to your campus or your neighborhood, there are efforts to push for pro-voting, pro-voter administrative decisions, policies, etc., even when we aren't seeing that action in Congress or when we're up against the pessimism of our nation's Supreme Court. We have to have a state-based strategy. We have to have a Southern agenda, and we have to stand with communities of color in fighting for their rights, no matter where they call home. So LDF as a national group is very committed to that. We're committed to that in Texas. We're committed to that in Louisiana. We're committed to that everywhere that Black people exist in this country. So if you want to learn more, want to get involved with us, you can visit naacpldf.org or ldf.vote, where we have more voter resources and opportunities to connect with us, engage, or also support the great work of election protection and 866 Our Vote.
Thank you so much, Tori, for sharing about the LDF. And of course, some of those other policies that I think you're referring to are the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. There's, like you said, a plethora of good things happening too that people are trying to move forward, and we'll see where progress leads, but it takes every one of us. So that is going to be wrapping it up for us today. And as we finish out, I'll just say that there's no understating the impact Callais will have on our state, but Texans and beyond know this fight and believe that voters should choose their representatives, not the other way around. Our coverage and advocacy related to this story will continue, but for some key takeaways, this major blow to voting rights protections will make it extremely difficult to oppose corrupt, gerrymandered maps. That will enable states like ours to continue drawing racist partisan maps that dilute the voting power of people of color, a practice that has led Texas maps being blocked every decade under the now narrowed Section 2 of the VRA. Bringing it back 60 years ago, Democrats passed the Voting Rights Act thanks to civil rights leaders and Texas progressive Lyndon Baines Johnson, and racists have been working to overturn it ever since. Still, the far-right Roberts Court might have landed another blow, but it's no knockout. From Louisiana to Texas and Texas to Louisiana, the people demand equal voting rights for every American. They're mobilizing, organizing, and ready to punch back at the ballot box. So that is going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you for joining us, NAACP LDF attorney Tori Wenger and Texas Civil Rights Project Voting Rights Outreach Coordinator Laderica Sylvan. Thank you. Appreciate your insights, and we'll catch you on the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Progress Texas is an independent, nonprofit, rapid response media organization. While campaigns come and go, we are the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. Please support our peerless work. Thank you for listening, and share this episode with a friend.